Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Nargis Kasyanova, and I'm a senior fellow at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, running its program on Central Asia. Thank you for joining us today for the event, the Taliban Takeover and Central Asian Security, What Will Russia and China Do?, co-organized by the Davis Center, the Oxus Society for Central Asian Affairs, and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. I will co-moderate it with my dear colleague, Bradley Jardine from the Oxus Society. This is part two. At the beginning of this month, we discussed the new situation on the ground, the reaction of Central Asian states, their approaches, and today we want to focus on the broader regional and global geopolitical context. And particularly, we want to discuss the current and future roles of two big neighbors of Central Asia, two Eurasian great powers, Russia and China. What will Russia, the traditional security provider in Central Asia, do? And what will China, the emerging provider, do? How will they deal with these new challenges and opportunities? What are the choices facing Central Asian states? And how much room for maneuver do they have? To tackle these and other questions, we gathered a great panel today. Let me introduce them. We will start with Andrey Kortunov, Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council since 2011. Throughout his career, Dr. Kortunov held various positions in the Institute for US and Canada Studies, including that of Deputy Director. He taught at universities around the world, including the University of California in Berkeley, and led several public organizations involved in higher education, social sciences, and social development. And he's definitely one of the top Russian experts on contemporary international relations and Russian foreign policy. Thank you, Andrei, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Our next speaker is Dr. Yoon Soon, who is a senior fellow and co-director of the East Asia program and director of the China program at the Stimson Center. Prior to that, she was based at the Brookings Institution, where she focused on Chinese national security decision-making processes and China-Africa relations. And earlier, she worked as the China analyst for the International Crisis Group in Beijing. Her expertise is in Chinese foreign policy, US-China relations, and China's relations with the neighboring countries and authoritarian regimes. Thank you so much, Yoon, for joining us.
Thank you, Nargis, for having me.
Our next speaker is Dr. Akram Umarov, who is a Fulbright visiting scholar at the University of Pittsburgh and a non-resident senior research fellow at the University of World Economy and Diplomacy in Tashkent. Previously, he worked as a senior research fellow at the Institute for Strategic and Regional Studies and Academy of Public Administration under the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan. His research focuses on various aspects of Central Asian security and governance. And let me note that he's the author of the monograph, Afghanistan and Regional Security of Central Asia, the beginning of 21st century, published in 2017. It's great to have you with us, Akram.
Thanks a lot for the invitation.
Last but not least, we have Zuhra Halimova with us, who is an independent consultant based in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, working on projects with the World Bank, European Union, and the Institute for Integrated Transition. Zuhra has over 20 years of experience working on post-conflict transitions, and for many years she was the executive director of the Open Society Institute Assistance Foundation in Tajikistan. And I'm very happy to mention that Zuhra is an alum of the Executive Education Program in US South Asia Leader Engagement Program on Terrorism and Threat to Global Security at Harvard Kennedy School for Executive Education. Great to have you with us, Zuhra.
Thank you for invitation.
So without further ado, let's start our discussion, and I want to start it with questions to you, Andrei. How do Russian policymakers view developments in Afghanistan and their impact on Central Asian security? What resources and mechanisms can it use to deal with the situation? And also, are multilateral formats such as CSTO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization important, or will Moscow draw primarily on bilateral relations and arrangements in the region, and also whether Russia's tough position on refugees potentially can change in the future. So a bunch of questions, you can tackle them in any order you want.
Thank you, Nargis. Let me start with saying that, of course, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan was not a surprise for Russia. They expected something like that to happen, especially after the Trump administration started its negotiations with Taliban in Doha. Russia itself developed ties to Taliban and was prepared to see a US withdrawal. Still, I think that the way how the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, the way how it was organized or disorganized, no matter how you put it, was a kind of a shock. I think that in Moscow, they expected to observe a transition period, maybe something similar to what happened in Afghanistan after the Soviet Union withdrew from this country in the late 1980s. So the expectation was that there would be a coalition government and some gradual change of powers in Kabul and in the country at large. However, it turned out to be different, as we know, and clear enough, there were a couple of immediate concerns in Moscow. The first concern was about potential spillover effect. And as you probably remember, there were border crossings in summer of this year, and there were concerns that probably we will see a major exodus, especially by ethnic Tajiks and the Uzbeks, maybe Kyrgyz, to Central Asian states that would complicate social and political situation in these states. It didn't happen, and I don't think that it will happen. So I think that this is already something that Russia is not so much concerned about. However, there are two major strategic concerns which are still important, and I think that they will remain important for the foreseeable future. And these are standard concerns that Russia has as far as Afghanistan is mentioned. First, the threat of potential terrorism, not necessarily coming from Taliban, but generated by currently dormant cells of ISIS, and maybe especially Al-Qaeda, because ISIS is at odds with Taliban. They are fighting against each other. But Al-Qaeda is a friendly organization protected by Taliban, and it assisted Taliban when Taliban was defeated 20 years ago by the international coalition. So Taliban, as we all know, refused to make any commitments regarding the activities of Al-Qaeda on the Afghan territory. The only thing that they promised is that they will not allow to use the Afghan territory for planning or executing any terrorist attacks against neighboring countries. So that's the first concern. And the second concern, as you might guess, is the drug traffic from Afghanistan, because this country has become the major producer of heroin. It's close to 700 tons, a lot of stuff, arguably anything between 80 and 90% of the global production. And Russia remains one of the major markets for this stuff. Again, its market share amounts to maybe 40, maybe 50%. The rest of the stuff goes elsewhere, mostly to Europe. So these are two concerns. Second, my second point is that Russia understands that it has significant limitations in Afghanistan, that the major economic role in the country is likely to be played by China. China has already made significant investments into this country, and China needs Afghanistan in order to exercise its joint projects with Pakistan, maybe through the Afghan corridor, or through other transportation corridors, which include Afghanistan. Politically, the odds are that we will see a lot of influence coming from Pakistan. Again, Pakistan was the country where Talibs found shelter when they were pushed out from Afghanistan by the international coalition. Of course, the relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan remain very complicated. I don't think that Talibs are ready to recognize the Durand line as the official border. No Afghan government is ready to do that. I think that the syndrome of a divided nation will be there, and Pakistan will be concerned about Taliban promoting extremist groups within Pakistan proper. There are, of course, these exotic plans about Greater Pashtunistan. Secessionism is still present in Pakistan, but still, I think Pakistan will have a lot of influence there. However, compared to other neighboring countries, compared to India and compared to Iran, I think Russia is in a better position because India was too late and Iran has many problems with Taliban, including the confessional problem with the Hazara minority in the center of the country. But also, of course, they're concerned that the Gulf might open the second front against Iran in Western Afghanistan. So Russia has a role, not the most important role, but still an important role. And I think it's indicative that a high-level delegation from Taliban visited Moscow in summer, where they made their commitments to Russia. In terms of multilateralism, yes, I think that Russia would prefer multilateral arrangements, maybe within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, especially now when Iran finally joined SCO as a full-fledged member. I think that Russia will definitely consult with its partners, including China, first and foremost, but also, we have strong contacts to Pakistanians and to other neighboring countries. So I think that ideally they would like to come with a common set of basic requests or demands, no matter how you label it, to Taliban. And Russia is not likely to be in a hurry to delist Taliban. I think that they will use the same option they used with Egypt when the Islamic Brotherhood came to power in Egypt back in 2012. They will build contacts to the new leadership of Kabul, but they will not be in a hurry to take Taliban off the list of terrorist organizations. A lot will depend, of course, on the performance of Taliban, which we can discuss right now. I think we receive very mixed signals from Kabul. The glass is either full empty or half empty or half full, depending on how you look at that. And finally, I don't want to take more of your time. I think that Russia is not that concerned about refugees. The assumption is that Russia is not the country of destination for Afghans living Afghanistan, that major flows of migrants will go to the south, and there are already a lot of refugees in Pakistan. Some of them will go west, and again, there are, I think, about 700,000 refugees in Iran already. Iran definitely makes use of Afghans. They are widely used in Syria, for example, as personnel of the Shia militia there. But of course, for refugees, the real region of destination is Europe. So it's likely to be more a European problem rather than a Russian one. However, having said that, I don't exclude that Russia might be interested in cooperating with the European Union in dealing with the migration problem if such a problem emerges. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I think we will get to the refugee issue and whether we saw sort of the kind of the last wave of refugees and with the upcoming food crisis and this kind of multifaceted humanitarian crisis. I don't know what will happen, and now the borders, all the borders are sealed pretty much, and so it's a kind of very desperate situation for many Afghans. But one clarifying question on the multilateral institutions, I think it makes a lot of sense that there will be consultations and there will be coordination, but in terms of practical cooperation on the ground, like security military assistance to Central Asian states, do you see much partnership? Whether this multilateralism will play a role, or that will be more kind of bilateral?
Let me say first of all on the multilateralism, I think that this is multilateralism with some strings attached. For example, Russia and I think China did not accept the offer to participate in G7 meetings related to Afghanistan, because the perception in Moscow that now Afghanistan becomes an issue for Eurasian powers to work on, not an issue for the West to take the lead. I think this is very clear. It doesn't mean that Russia will not work in a broader framework. I think that they might discuss some kind of new resolutions in the UN Security Council. As you probably know, Russia and China both abstained from supporting the previous resolution on Afghanistan, but they didn't veto it. I think that they can work within G20. But still, I think the assumption is that you guys basically failed. Now it's our turn to demonstrate that we can handle this issue better than you did. I think this is, to put it bluntly, this is the perception in Moscow. Now, in terms of security arrangement, I would agree with you that there will be also some limits for multilateralism here. I think that Russia will rely primarily on CSTO structures and also on its bilateral relations with select Central Asian states, which are not members to SSTO or which have special arrangements with Moscow. Of course, there will be also some kind of coordination with China and Pakistan, but I think that this coordination will be mostly in the domain of intelligence agencies, something related to identifying potential cells of ISIS and maybe offering some assistance to the Taliban government. But it remains to be seen. I think that on security, Russia will not go too multilateral, especially if this multilateralism involves working with its Western partners.
Okay, thank you very much. And of course, we're all very curious about the special arrangements with Turkmenistan in particular.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah,
it's your area, and let's see what's going to happen at the G20 extraordinary meeting in October. That is devoted to Afghanistan and the humanitarian crisis there. Okay, let me turn to you, Yoon, with another set of questions. So what is Beijing's perspective on the situation in Afghanistan, the risks, opportunities that arise from it? Andrey just mentioned the kind of the economic role that China will play in Afghanistan. Sort of, everybody's expecting that. How will China manage relations with the Taliban? How do developments in Afghanistan affect China's policy towards Central Asia? And do you expect the SCO play any substantive role?
Thank you, Nargis. Yeah, these are great questions, and I'm afraid that a lot of answers are still missing from the picture because they are still being developed. But what I can offer today is basically focus on two sides. First one is how China sees the development in Afghanistan, especially related to the Taliban-led government. What are the risks that China identifies? And then, like I was instructed, I primarily will focus on the preparation or the preparatory measures that China has taken in order to deal with a potential fallout or a potential security crisis in the country. And I have to say that the content is pretty rich in that arena. So first, on the assessment of Afghanistan under Taliban again, I think when the Taliban-led government was first announced earlier in September, China was not satisfied with the composition and believed it was not inclusive enough. But then in the new announcement on 21st about the new list of cabinet members and deputies, so there have been multiple ethnic minority members being included, although there was no women. So of course, it's still a major deficiency from the international community, but I think for China, the inclusion of the ethnic minorities basically satisfied the Chinese demand for inclusiveness. I think China has offered this Taliban-led government the benefit of the doubt from the very beginning, because China sees that Taliban has become more practical and more, hopefully more rational and moderate. This is quite similar to China's expectation out of Pakistan, which is for Pakistan to turn into what they call the 3M country. And the 3 M's are Muslim, moderate, and modern. So there's a genuine hope in Beijing that the Taliban has the potential to lead the country out of the decades-long quagmire, assuming that the group could become more moderate and more pragmatic. So despite this positive tone and hope for the long-term change of Taliban, I don't think China is in a hurry to extend its diplomatic recognition of the regime. China is not going to be the first one to do so, but China will definitely not be the last one to extend this recognition. But still, because for Beijing, uncertainty remains a key word in China's assessment of Afghanistan for the foreseeable future. There are abundant challenges, the list is very long. And Andrey mentioned some of them. And on the top of the Chinese list, of course, Taliban's lack of capacity to run the country, multi-layered crisis from food shortage to social instability, the consolidated symbiosis between the Taliban and terrorist organizations after decades of interdependence, especially on the local level. There's also the difficulties to win international recognition, the reputational baggage that Taliban carries for the Haqqani network, and also the potential for escalated great power competition in Afghanistan, and even for a proxy war. Although China is concerned with the stability and security of Afghanistan, hence the inclusiveness of the government, the one issue that tops all concerns is Taliban's relations with the Uyghur militant groups in Afghanistan. So on September 9th, Taliban spokesperson Shahin told Chinese media in an exclusive interview that, quote unquote, many East Turkestan Islamic movement members have left Afghanistan because the Taliban has categorically told them that there's no place for anyone to use Afghanistan territory against other countries, including its neighboring countries. So this commitment, along with Taliban Baradar's earlier commitment about not harboring anti-China forces in Afghanistan, temporarily suffice China's demand for a severance of ties. Although the problem is there is very little confidence in Beijing that different factions of the Taliban and their personnel on the local level will be strictly implementing this guideline. So this gets into the factionalism of the Taliban and whether the commitment made on the top will actually be implemented on the lower level. So therefore, I think China has been actively weaving a safety net to prevent the potential spillover effect of what China calls the three evil forces: separatism, terrorism, and extremism from Afghanistan into China. So what are some of the measures that China, or the precautions that China has been preparing? The first one is actually quite direct. It's bilateral. So that is a direct demand for the Taliban to sever ties with ETIM and also to not harbor Uyghur militant cells and Uyghur militant groups in Afghanistan. So this practically equates to a red line that China has drawn for the Taliban politically. So although China has not specified as for what the consequences will be if this red line is violated, just like in the case of Pakistan, we saw at least 4 terrorist attacks against Chinese national and the Chinese assets from April to summer this year. it's very difficult for the top level government to really rein in the factions or different forces within the country. So there's not a clear explanation from China as for the consequences if the red line is violated. But I think this condition will have a major effect determining China's political relations and also economic relations, economic interest with Taliban for the foreseeable future. So this red line has already been drawn. Taliban has been put on notice that we will see what will happen. So that is to say that, like I mentioned, China doesn't really have a lot of confidence with Taliban's commitment because Taliban is symbiosis between Taliban and the terrorist groups in Central Asia for many years through ideologies, through personnel, financing, and the arms trade, and the fact that factional politics does prevail inside Taliban. So there's still a risk in the Chinese assessment. There's still a risk that Taliban or some corners in Taliban will provide support to Uyghur militant groups. So how is China preparing for that? And there's quite a long list of preparation. The first one is a border protection. We know that China and Afghanistan shares a very short period of border, the Wakhan corridor, which is about 92 kilometers, so about 57 miles of a border. But this the border patrol and the border protection along the Wakhan corridor in China is termed, nicknamed the impenetrable counterterrorism iron wall. So the Chinese have already sealed the border since 2001. And given the geography of the Wakhan corridor, what the Chinese border patrol people are saying is that anyone who tries to come through the Wakhan corridor is easily identifiable, given the terrain, that there's nowhere that they can hide. So basically, if there's anyone trying to come over from the Afghan side, the Chinese can easily identify them and also block them from entering China. So there seems to be a pretty high level of confidence about the Wakhan corridor's impenetrability. But except the Wakhan corridor, there are other paths of penetration from the Chinese perspective. And there is, and the most likely one, the identified, the most risky one and dangerous one is the eastern region of Tajikistan. So the shared border between among Tajikistan, China, and Afghanistan. And because of what the Chinese see as a weak control by the Tajik central government over its eastern region, especially in the border region, it is highly likely that the Uyghur militants could enter China from the Tajik border instead of the Afghan border. So China has been preparing on the side of the Tajikistan for almost 7 years now, basically since the NATO withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2014. And China has been supporting Tajikistan with a long list of, I would say, security assistance. So like, for example, since 2014, China has supplied equipment and facilities to enhance the capacity in terms of the security of Tajikistan, including the, for example, the watchtowers and some of the barracks and the front deployed stations along the border. So this includes, for example, 30 to 40 watchtowers that the Chinese has supplied to Tajikistan facing the Afghan border. So China has also supplied the, for example, mine-resistant ambush protected vehicles and armored vehicles that's specifically designated for counterterrorism and the social instability issues. So that's the supply of equipment and the facilities. The second category of assistance is the joint exercise with military exercises with Tajikistan and in the past with previous Afghan government. So it is noted that the frequency of military exercise between China and Tajikistan has picked up speed since 2015, including military exercises that Chinese soldiers directly participated in along the Afghan Tajikistan border. China has also provided trainings for officials and security personnel of Tajikistan in order to increase their law enforcement capability. There have also been reports about this this joint counterterrorism center that has been established in Badakhshan since 2018. And the reports also include the Chinese armed police being stationed at this counterterrorism center for patrolling the border purpose. So although there have been plenty of reports about this establishment, China has never really officially responded to it, so neither deny or recognize. So I think that's something that's definitely worth paying attention to. And last but not least, the quadrilateral security mechanism that Nargis, you mentioned earlier, that was established in 2016. When it was first established, it was regarded as one of the most important multilateral mechanisms that China established and chairs, that provides a platform for regional consultation. So that platform includes Afghanistan, China, Pakistan, and Tajikistan. Although I would say that with Taliban's takeover, because this quadrilateral mechanism has been happening with the previous Afghan government, and how Taliban will be absorbed into this mechanism, and whether Taliban will be susceptible or acceptable for some of the terms, for example, I think that still is subject to negotiation. So I don't know for sure that this quadrilateral mechanism is still functioning as of today. But I do believe the Chinese want to incorporate Taliban-led Afghanistan into this mechanism. So we will see what happens there. It's interesting about the security preparation along the Tajik-Afghan border, because from Chinese government analysts and Chinese government experts, there have been a recognition that China has formed a counterterrorism joint force with Tajikistan, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. So, and this force has been deployed on the Tajik side of the border, along the border. So it seems that, at least from the Chinese side, there is this recognition that a force has already been established, and the eastern region of Tajikistan is regarded as the most vulnerable. And in the event of a security fallout or the spillover of the security crisis inside Afghanistan, there have also been discussions in China about setting up a buffer zone along the border, but on the along the Tajik-Afghan border, to seal off the border and set up this buffer zone to prevent refugees and prevent militants from crossing over. So I think that's something that's definitely worth watching as well. And of course, between China and Russia, there have been the most direct military exercise that happened in earlier in the summer. In I believe it was in the first week of August. It took place in Ningxia province in China, which is the geographical terrain of Ningxia province is very similar to that of Afghanistan. And for this military exercise, it's very much focused on counterterrorism combat. And so it has included the surveillance, early warning system, combat, and eradication of terrorist cells. So I think China and Russia have jointly planned plenty of military or security measures in terms of the Afghanistan as well. Last but not least, just a few words about Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I think from the Chinese perspective, Shanghai Cooperation Organization is regarded as a prime platform to also be the first choice if the Afghan security crisis comes to the region as a challenge. So I think for the Chinese, for Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries to provide a joint operation or to provide some joint activities to stabilize the country when the border region, well, especially, so I'll be specific. So under the condition that the borders with Afghanistan has become unstable, and there are large numbers of refugees and militants crossing over. What the Chinese experts have been saying is that the members of ICO could jointly work together to stabilize these areas. So not necessarily an intervention inside Afghanistan, but at least a security or a safety operation along the borders with Afghanistan. Potential humanitarian and intervention or peacekeeping, those are possible, but I don't think the Chinese will support that that those operations without a UN mandate. So which means that I think any intervention inside Afghanistan will, at least by the minimum, require UN Security Council authorization. But I think the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is regarded as a prime platform. Eventually, I think the Chinese vision is that Afghanistan will be absorbed into Shanghai Cooperation Organization because, hey, it's in the center and this cannot be missed from the picture. But I think that will have to depend on the solution or the solving of the security challenges, diplomatic negotiation, and in the end have a political deal about Afghanistan joining. So I will stop there. Hope that was interesting and look forward to the other panelists' remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yoon. That was great. Well, it seems like it will be a very long-term plan to incorporate Afghanistan into the SCO as a kind of normal state. Two quick questions. One is, do you understand correctly that the leverage that China has vis-a-vis Taliban is first the recognition, and the second sort of assistance, trade, investments? Is there anything else? And the second question is, does Beijing have sufficient expertise on Afghanistan, in your opinion?
Great questions. Thank you, Nargis. On the leverage, I would say you pretty much covered it. So political recognition and economic assistance and economic support, those are the primary two leverages that Beijing have. As for others, maybe through the regional platform, maybe through the regional coalition or the alignment oppositions, but it's not regarded as a primary source of leverage against the Taliban. On the second question, does Beijing have enough expertise? I think whether Beijing has enough expertise depends on what Beijing wants to achieve. So I think in this case, I would say that Beijing's bar or Beijing's requirement for Afghanistan is, at this stage, is really pretty low. It's really just focused on the security, especially the counterterrorism front. So although there have been all these discussions, all this, I would say, media frenzy about the mineral resources that Afghanistan has to offer, Beijing is not going to launch in until there is a prospect or potential or possibility for sustainable stability on the ground. For the two mega projects that China has invested in Afghanistan so far, the anti-copper mine and Amur Basin CNPC oil exploration project, both have been basically stuck for about a decade now because of the local instability and because of the inability to negotiate proper deals with the Afghan government. So I would say Beijing has been burned pretty badly in terms of investment in Afghanistan. So any hope for Beijing to launch into the country with cash to flood the country, especially the mineral resources, the mining industries, I think that's unlikely to transpire in the near future. So which is to say that if Beijing's goal is really primarily focused on counterterrorism at this point, then the expertise that China needs is really just focused on the counterterrorism front, on the security front. And I think on those, because China has been ramping up its efforts to deal with counterterrorism issues with Central Asia for, I would say, a couple of decades now, especially the effort accelerated since the Urumqi riot in 2009. I would like to say that Beijing does have enough expertise because this is an issue that's so important for them, and they have been focused only on this issue for more than a decade. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Okay, let me move to you, Akram. Well, can you tell us what's Uzbekistan's position on developments in Afghanistan, and how do these developments affect Tashkent's ambitious connectivity plans? How do they impact Uzbekistan's relations with Russia and China? Oh, okay. Yes. The floor is yours.
Many thanks for this opportunity. If you don't mind, I have very short kind of presentation, just mainly some pictures and maps. I think they can be of interest to our audience. So I'll try to be very brief as I'm very looking forward to our discussion. So the Taliban takeover was not kind of a big surprise for Uzbekistan. I think it was something expected considering the last developments and considering the firm withdrawal decision of the United States, which was the withdrawal actually started during Obama, but finished during the Biden period. So the Taliban-Uzbekistan relations there were relations between this counterparts even before this takeover. So these are some pictures from August 2019 when the delegation of Taliban led by Baradar visited Tashkent, and some kind of tweeters from Taliban representatives after this takeover, appreciating Uzbekistan's some efforts to support the new Afghanistan in new circumstances. And one of the last things which Uzbekistan provided in September, the humanitarian aid, which consists of clothes and foodstuff, medicines, clothing. So again, this was again kind of new type of interaction. If you compare with other regional countries, so there are, for example, the ambassadors of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan already had an official meeting with the current interim Minister of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan. But Uzbekistan, without having kind of this direct interaction with the new foreign policy officials of Afghanistan, still in contact with this government and trying to provide humanitarian support. And they had a meeting in Hayraton between the special representative of Uzbekistan for Afghanistan and the governor of neighboring bordering region of Uzbekistan, Surkhandarya, with representatives of Balkh province and some officials of Taliban government in Kabul. So again, these are some pictures again, but the fact that there is interaction, it means that there is some kind of understanding, there is ongoing exchange and a discussion on how to build the future relations. I think Uzbekistan is also, like many other countries, are still far from full recognition of Taliban as an official member of official representative of Afghanistan, but it depends on the stance of international community. And as soon as the first kind of steps of Taliban's recognition will start, I think Uzbekistan will join this and will support this development. So why Uzbekistan is active now, why Uzbekistan is trying to build some relations with new power in Afghanistan, not very new, but still. So I think the reasons are quite simple. So we have the economy, infrastructure, security interests, which Uzbekistan is trying to push. So economic, for the last years, Afghanistan has become one of the major trade partners of Uzbekistan, and it's more in benefits of Uzbekistan. So we are mainly exporting goods to and services to Afghanistan rather than importing. So about 98% of this trade turnover is an export from Uzbekistan. So it reached about $800 million during the recent years, and the current instability in Afghanistan, of course, affected it substantially, and Uzbekistan is not interested in halting this trade relations. And the stabilization of situation in this country is a great interest of Uzbekistan in order to reinforce and revitalize these trade relations with this country, because many Uzbek companies have very close links with Afghan counterparts in sending some important foodstuff, clothes, building stuff, and etc. So it's very important to revitalize this trade as soon as possible. Infrastructure, of course, so there are still these projects which Uzbekistan is promoting. The one which is already under construction is Sorkhan Pulikhomri energy supply line. So the most part of it already constructed, and so the small part which is going to Kabul, so from from the center of central province of Afghanistan to Kabul is still under construction. So it's now kind of frozen due to the situation in Afghanistan. But of course, it's again in the interest of Uzbekistan to stabilize situation in this country and to continue the construction of this electricity supply line. And this famous railroad to Peshawar, Khairat Mazar-e Sharif, Kabul, Peshawar, again, it's one of the kind of masterpieces of the current government, and it's very interested to continue its planning and its construction. Of course, it hasn't been started, but now there is a process of making this technical evaluation and the possible railway route to this planned project. And also there is not very priority, but still a kind of planned project of building a railway from Mazar-e Sharif to Herat. So priority number one is Peshawar road, but also in a longer term perspective, the road to Herat is also under consideration. So again, these are within the plans of Uzbekistan to diversify its transport corridors and to decrease its over-reliance on northern road going across Kazakhstan, Russia to Baltic and further to European countries. So again, this is in the interest of Uzbekistan. From the security perspective, again, there are several terrorist groups which are active on the Afghan territory. So Katibat Imam al-Bukhari, which are mainly consistent of Central Asian countries' citizens, so-called Islamic movement of Turkestan or Uzbekistan, different namings. They are still present in this country. Of course, we cannot deny the role of ISIS, Khorasan. It hasn't kind of had a clear impact on, let's say, Uzbek-Afghan border, but still this is a potential challenge for Central Asian countries. And again, this current instability and transition period in Afghanistan can lead to the increase of the activities of this group. So Uzbekistan is interested to have a partner on the Afghan side who will support and who will be interested to also have a similar vision on counter-terrorism efforts in the region. Andrey has already mentioned the drugs trafficking issue, so I think there is no need to stop on this a lot. Still a problem, and Central Asia is one of the major routes for this trafficking. So it's in our interest to again have some reliable partner on the Afghan territory who will support our activities in countering this trafficking. And also I think the issue which usually is not mentioned very actively, the fact that Afghanistan is now possessing even much more weaponry than it had at the end of 1990s, when we all kind of were very securitized from the Afghan problem. So we had this alarm bells ringing that Afghanistan is a problem, we need to do something with it. But now the amount of weaponry which exists in Afghanistan is much more higher than at that period, but still we are kind of missing this issue. So I think this is very important. We have seen this a number of videos and photos of the completely left military bases with full weaponry. So it's still unclear who is controlling this weaponry, to what extent Taliban is capable to provide the necessary security and control of this weaponry. So this is again in high concern in Central Asia, who will control this weaponry and how it will be used. So again, this is important in terms of cooperating with some partner on the Afghan territory. So again, I would like to say that it's completely different stories when you consider should you interact with Taliban or not. If you are the country which is neighboring with Afghanistan, and if you are kind of sitting somewhere in the US or Europe, you can have a more discussion about some ideas, about some principles. But if you have a direct neighborhood with this country, you have a direct border, and it's not just 140 kilometers border of Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. We should consider this much longer border of Central Asian countries with Afghanistan. So Uzbekistan's idea is not just provide the security of this short border, but thinking of partnership, let's say, with Tajikistan and Turkmenistan on providing this long border of Central Asia with Afghanistan. So we shouldn't be very narrow-minded in analyzing these issues. So this is the perspective why Uzbekistan is trying to have some interaction with Taliban. So again, this is based on some realities in Afghanistan. So maybe this is not very pleasant. This is not very expected outcome in this country, but this is a reality which we should deal with. And if we continue kind of having the position of isolating Afghanistan, having no interaction, no relations with the new power in this country, so it can lead again to the situation back into end of 1990s when Taliban was isolated and the radicalism in Afghanistan increased, and it also increased the support of terrorist groups which were active in Central Asia. So this is very hard decision, which position, which stand you should have, either to cooperate or non-cooperate. But again, considering history, experience, there is a thinking that we should at least somehow interact with this movement in order to securitize our interests and our priorities. What about Russia? I think Russia has substantially increased its presence, its importance, and its role in Central Asia. But Russia was traditionally one of the leading countries in this part of the world and major partner for all Central Asian countries. But now in the current circumstances, considering this quick withdrawal of the US and again the NATO forces, and as Russia is providing full-scale military and security support to the Central Asian country, which is very important in the current realities, especially countries like Tajikistan. Again, if you look back to the history and early 2010s, there was a kind of bargaining from the Tajikistan about continuing a lease of a military base to Russia. So Mr. Rahmon had a lot of negotiations, exchange with Russian counterparts. Should we leave it? Should we have a shorter period? But now it's obvious that this kind of questions are completely lifted out. So there is no kind of discussion. Should we have this base and Russian support in Tajikistan to respond to some security challenges from neighboring countries? So it's obvious. So again, it's a sign of a very high Russian security and military presence in the region. Again, it's also linked to the fact that after this quick withdrawal and complete mess in Afghanistan, there was very limited or no support from the West in terms of security. There was no security guarantees. I think there was no close military cooperation. Yes, of course, there is this permanent cooperation links between the countries, Central Asian countries and the Western world. But in the current circumstances, this kind of much more advanced level of cooperation, I think it was not met in the region. If you compare again the period of Obama when he declared his withdrawal, there was a round of talks with Central Asian countries, how the US will continue its support and its help to the region in terms of military and security issues after this withdrawal. But in the real realities, I think this kind of interaction is quite limited, and therefore the role of Russia and China in terms of security providers in the region is substantially increasing. Again, I've already touched slightly upon China. China, together with Russia, is becoming the leading countries, leading powers in Central Asia, especially in terms of cooperation with this region on Afghanistan, and this in very quick and kind of advanced interaction between Russian and Chinese officials with Central Asian counterparts. Again, a science of this advanced level of cooperation. And there's military trainings which happened within Shanghai Cooperation Organization, CSTO, again, the science of very important presence of these countries in the region. But again, this is also linked to the fact that now Russia and China is trying to partner with Pakistan in dealing with Afghanistan. Again, this is to some extent, new realities. So not just Russia, China, and to less extent Central Asia, but we are having more and more presence of Pakistan as a new power, as a new player in Central Asia, because Central Asian countries are now, even on the issues of Taliban, let's say Tajikistan is now actively cooperating with Pakistan, which we couldn't see in the past. So Pakistan, and not of course on the level of China and Russia, but still increasing its importance and significance and role in Central Asia, especially in the new realities of Afghanistan. And the Chinese interests, I think, were excellently presented by Professor Yun Sun, so I think there is no need to spend much time on these issues. What about refugees? So this is very interesting topic for Central Asia, and I would like to just share with you some news which were you could quite often see on different European and US media agencies, that there were, the European officials shared a lot of similar viewings on the current refugee crisis in Afghanistan. So if the refugees would like to leave Afghanistan, they should go to neighboring countries, shouldn't come to the Europe. And this refugee crisis should be to some extent kind of regional owned, regional led. So this is very interesting position and to this issue. I think why I'm saying interesting, because in the past, when US or EU or NATO, they established some strategies on Afghanistan, they poorly kind of consulted with Central Asia on these issues on Afghanistan, what they should do, how they should deal with this issue, what are the kind of history, culture, mentality of this country, and how they approach to this issue. But as there were no discussion that this strategy should be regional owned and regional led. But as soon as there is a refugee crisis, there are a lot of discussion that region should deal with this, and we will support you. I think, of course, region being a neighbor, a historical partner, and having kind of very fraternal relations with Afghanistan, is ready to support this country. But putting all this problems on the shoulders of the region, I think it's a very kind of not inappropriate approach to this situation. If we start this bargaining that you should be responsible, not we will completely, I think, lose the situation, and no one will become a winner of the situation. Again, if you remember the countries like, consider the experience of countries like Iran and Pakistan, who are hosting millions of Afghan refugees for years. So no one is happy with the situation. No Afghan refugees which are living in these countries, no these governments which are kind of trying to host and to give some shelter to these refugees. So this is not a win-win situation. So if we start this putting the responsibility to each other and a lack of cooperation, we will all kind of completely fail. So I think it's important to have more discussion and more support and more coordination on these issues, and such stances that we should create deportation centers in Central Asia, I think, is that they are completely misleading these possibilities of this cooperation. Only mutual support and coordination will help us to deal with these issues. Thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Akram. Just 30-second answers, if you can. Well, what are the, Afghanistan has this substantial Uzbek community. What's the relationship with the Uzbek community of Afghanistan? And I understand 30 seconds might not be enough, but if you can try to do it. And the second, who will invest in these big infrastructure projects, you think? Who is expected to invest in them?
Thanks a lot. I'll try to have 15 seconds for each. So regarding Uzbek community, I think Uzbekistan having kind of supporting this community in Afghanistan has never kind of put it very bluntly that we are standing behind this Uzbek community. So the Uzbek official position was always Yes, there is an Uzbek community which is close in terms of, again, culture, language, history, but they are still Afghan citizens. So we should support them. We should provide some education. We should provide humanitarian aid, but still we shouldn't kind of try to isolate them and to demonstrate that we are kind of backing them and supporting them. I think this stance should continue. Of course, it's not just Uzbek community, but they're naturally kind of located on the border with Uzbekistan. So it's much easier to Uzbekistan to reach them, to support them. You have a railroad going to Mazar Sharif, and you can provide all kind of assistance support on using this railroad. So I think this is an approach, and this will continue in the new circumstances as well. Regarding your second question on who will invest in infrastructure projects, of course, now they are frozen, and the investment perspectives will depend on the further integration of Taliban to international community, these international mechanisms, because the expected investors are these international financial institutions like World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and other kind of Islamic Development Bank. So, of course, these institutions will look on how Taliban is recognized, acknowledged by international community, how it's integrated. Only after this, they will consider the possibilities of funding. I think it's not kind of in the interest of Central Asia to have one source of funding for this infrastructure project. We should have some kind of mixed international institutions, Chinese funding, and this will be, I think, beneficial for all partners and interested participants.
Thank you, Akram. Okay, let me go to Zuhra. And Dushanbe took a very different approach to the situation and to Taliban. So how would you describe and explain Tajikistan's position and what are President Rahmon's calculations in your view? And how do these developments affect Tajikistan's relations with Russia and China? Oh, unmute, Zuhra. Please unmute.
Thank you. Let's start with why Tajikistan has a different position. And it's actually very clearly about how much border you have to share with the country, and Tajikistan is actually having most difficult border, basically kind of transparent in some parts border, as Professor Yunsun said, and it's actually raising the concern. And it's the longest border. It's 1,400 kilometers. It's like basically the entire region is like on the shoulder of Tajikistan. Turkmenistan has only 804 kilometers and Uzbekistan 144, which is more manageable in terms. The second part I have to mention is about the demographics of Afghanistan, and the largest second ethnic group. I wouldn't put it minority because it's not really minority anymore. It's quite large. Even if I will not use what Tajikistan says about 40+% of population, but even I will use the estimation of World Atlas, for example, which says it's 27%. But then if you will calculate the rest of the ethnic minorities like Uzbeks and Hazaras and Turkmens and Aymaks and, it will actually, all these minorities are plus together, creating the actually majority of population in Afghanistan rather than Pashtuns themselves. And while Taliban is actually representing more Pashtun population and actually coming to deal with the large amount of other people, that is creating a problem. The third issue I would put is the experiences of Tajikistan after collapse of Soviet Union and civil war and the role of Afghanistan there. We should not forget that somehow parts of the civil war in Tajikistan was spillover effect of certain ideologies and certain groups. who were helping the radicals in Tajikistan in the civil war. And they have been actually quite active in that. In the same time, parallel to this, Afghanistan groups like, Ahmad Shah Massoud and Rabbani were playing as a peace brokers, were trying to make sure that there is peace in Tajikistan, and they were investing personal attention into actually investing peace. So if you will look why Tajikistan is so keen about supporting, unlike our Uzbek neighbors, their kinship in Afghanistan, because there is not only recognition of the Tajiks in Afghanistan, but there is certain personal relationship and personal appreciation of what was happening in Tajikistan during civil war, and especially their effective role on mitigating peace among Tajiks and actually making this peace happen and actually helping reconciliation and having the role in the reconciliation of nation in Tajikistan during civil war and actually making the peace accord sign. So I think this is very important factors not to forget, because sometimes people would say why Tajikistan is so keen. Well, there are important things which should be considered, and they're important in terms of human behavior and human decisions, and partly because the connection between Tajiks of Tajikistan and Tajiks in Afghanistan, it's probably much more closer than the probably Uzbeks and Turkmens of Afghanistan with the countries in Central Asia. So I will put it this way. Another part is, of course, the role of Tajiks during the previous, Taliban, existence. I would put it before. We heard it, we were witnessing it all, we knew what was happening, and we knew what was happening with also other ethnic minorities during the rule of Taliban, while, we are not, even though it was 20 years ago, but we still actually quite nicely remembering it. And while Taliban is saying that we changed, there is a saying in Russian, "Доверяй, но проверяй," is like, trust by verify. I think this is a position that can you actually trust? You have to really verify. And I think the position of trust is missing there, even though most of the countries are saying that, yeah, we have to look and see what Taliban will do, or Taliban said they're going to be changed, or they're changed and they're not the same anymore. In reality, we are going to see lots of examples that not much changed in the Taliban's behavior. And third is, of course, Tajikistan is not the country during civil war anymore. It's much more different player in Central Asia. And Tajikistan understands the burden it has actually living side by side Afghanistan for 40 years of war. So we don't have to forget that we were witnessing, and we were part of the Soviet invasion in Afghanistan, and we were actually, investing human resources into Afghanistan. And then after that, we were actually constantly being, neighbors. We didn't go and depart. We didn't produce like walls as many other neighbors did. And we actually understand what is going to happen. And of course, we understand also that the peace is not brought by one side and said, here we are, we win it, and now we will bring the peace. Because we got through the peace process, we understand to actually create the peace, it's actually a long process of actually patience and tolerance, and actually creating a common ground, and actually working through this peace process to really achieve the peace and stability in the country. And understanding that when Taliban comes and say, we are going to build the peace, but in the same time, they're actually using the form of investing in fear among the population, that they have to actually be fearful of Taliban instead of actually trusting the new government. That is actually creating some sort of sense of, are we sure that Taliban is actually going to create the peace? So it's much more remarkable. So Tajikistan decided not to be as diplomatic and maybe not probably as pragmatic as Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, and not conciliatory as Russia and China. They become much more explicit, saying, no, we will not recognize government of Taliban if it will not be inclusive, and it will not include ethnic minorities, and of course stated that Tajiks and Uzbeks. So for some reason, most of the countries are not recognizing that. Our president mentioned Uzbeks as well, but yes, in all statements of the government of Tajikistan, both these ethnic minority groups were actually mentioned. So explicit position of Tajikistan is based on probably the same issue of trust and verify. Do we actually build the trust, and how we can verify it? So everyone is watching. Everyone is being extra diplomatic about what they have to say about. They would actually say the same thing. If you look at the, the position of even Turkey Countries Forum, which was the last event in Baku, where they actually said the same thing in their communique, saying that they are looking forward to have an inclusive government, which will include ethnic groups. The CSTO and meeting, as well as then Shanghai Cooperation anniversary meeting in Dushanbe, also come with the same type of idea. And then you hear most of the, many of the countries actually saying the same thing. Probably the harsh part of Tajikistan saying was that it explicitly said about a particular ethnic groups who are representing the opposition to Taliban. So Taliban considers Tajikistan as troublemaker, because everything was quite going nicely and smoothly, and all of a sudden one country is actually saying they don't agree, even though they are in the same regional structures and they're actually dealing with the same issues around. And they have economic ties, even though not big, probably not bigger than Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, but they also have quite a large share of investment of regional projects, which includes CASA 1000. And it's electricity project, which has a tail to go to Pakistan. So Pakistan has a very interesting role now, because Imran Khan's behavior at the Shanghai Cooperation meeting was trying to actually pacify the whole discussion about Taliban, because they were brokering it. And there were actually discussion between President of Tajikistan and Imran Khan actually been on the tweets, that they are going to create some sort of dialogue between Taliban and Tajik ethnic minorities to come to Tajikistan and have first discussion here. Whether it will happen or not, Imran Khan also mentioned that he already conveyed his message to Taliban. Whether it's going to happen or not, it's surprisingly Taliban right after this, like in a few days after, mentioned that Tajikistan is actually interfering in the Afghanistan, internal issues, and they actually sent a squadron to the border in Badakhshan. So it's a very interesting dynamic of the things, but we don't say that nothing is happening in terms of the discussions and deliberations between these two countries. Things are happening. What is the calculus? As I say, President Rahmon have been actually mentioning the same issue on the General Assembly, which was actually not only for the regional consumption, it was actually global issue. And he mentioned that it's important that Afghanistan is not forgotten. Afghanistan can be forgotten as soon as the global powers are not really paying attention, or the issues like pandemic will take over all the other, ideas, and Afghanistan will remain an issue of region. However, the Afghanistan is not an issue of region anymore. It's actually a global issue because of the spillover effect, because of the inspiration which Taliban gave to all different other radical groups globally. And you actually see it on the social media, how how lively they are actually talking about this opportunity, that if Taliban could do that, why would not them to actually try their efforts? It means that they are going to reconsider certain tactics they had, and they would probably think how they are going to mitigate this opportunity. In terms of opportunistically to look whether this whether the Taliban, which actually promised to all these countries who are supporting him to deal with the different radical groups inside. Doubtful, because they are so intertwined. Even though probably some fraction of Taliban will fight, or they will have exemplary, probably, I don't know, exemplary tactics to show that they are going to deal with Uyghurs and they're going to let them go. But the question is where they will go. In the closest border, if they are going to Pakistan, would the Pakistan allow them to enter? Or they will come to Tajikistan, would Tajikistan allow them to enter? Or, what is the way they will go? Or even the same, mercenaries who are old Taliban from post-Soviet countries, who become actually quite significantly Afghani. They have families, they have ties, they had probably been so intertwined on the dealings, and probably they have shared interest. That is very difficult to imagine that they would be able to actually get rid of these people, or even in few years, because they are not really controlling these groups. And in the same time, Al-Qaeda is still there, as far as many other experts were mentioning it. They are still guests of Taliban. And as they would say, our tradition, we cannot kick off the guests. So it's very tricky. Afghanistan is becoming safe. It will become, and it still is, safe haven to all these different radical groups. Are they going to regroup? Are they going to create associations? Are they going to, change their names, etc.? This is, time will show. But the problem of Taliban, that everyone expects them to behave well. They have to produce certain behavior which they never had before. And this is actually tricky, because one thing that Afghanistan, like basically overnight, lost so much brain. So most of this brain in the governments left. And now we have the country who has to produce everything, like from peace building to economic development to security to many other things. So expectations are so high from Taliban, which is almost impossible to do. And why we actually say it in Tajikistan? Because we know it on our own experience. After civil war, we had this severe brain drain. We had to redo the entire country, and we had to find people who would actually work in the governance and etc. So our concerns are legitimate, and we are actually quite, I would put it, if our neighbors are more or less optimistic about considering to work even informally with Taliban, in our case, it's more pessimistic, because we know that it's not easy to really do and deal with the zillions of problems which they have in their plate. Are we going to have a security problem? Of course, this is number one concern. And
we are really over time. We can do it in 1 minute, and that'll be
it's just to finish. We had these drills, we had the meetings of Shanghai Cooperation and CSTO, and everyone was talking about creation in case of things go wrong in Afghanistan. Buffer zone, that Tajikistan will become a buffer zone for rest of the Central Asia. And everyone basically agreed that they would be actually heavily involved in this. So no one actually said to this no. The question is how things would emerge in Afghanistan, and all will depend on the, how Afghanistan will work again with the victory of Taliban. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we are over time, and actually we decided to go a little bit more over time to have a Q&A. We received so many excellent questions, and it's our fault, the organizers' fault, that we are over time because we asked so many questions to the speakers, and the speakers made their best to answer them. Let me turn to Bradley for to moderate this lightning round of questions.
Sure, thanks for those excellent presentations. I'll try and ask a brief set of questions. I obviously can't ask all of them. And if we just keep our answers short, we'll try to expand the debate. So we'll start with a question from Peter Frankopan. He said that none of the speakers had mentioned or the focus on human rights, including gender, ethnic and religious minority related issues. How do we feel that Russia, China, or Uzbekistan may address these? Will it engage them? And if so, how will they engage them? And that's open to anyone.
Well, I tried to respond to this question, arguing that definitely it depends on how we or they define human rights. And of course, if you take countries around Afghanistan, none of these countries can qualify as a mature democracy. And all of these countries are somewhat critical of the Western interpretation of human rights. However, I think that there are certain red lines that will be kept in mind. And if Taliban crosses these red lines, definitely it will complicate its relations with the neighboring countries as well. For instance, Taliban is very sensitive on the issue of gender roles in the traditional Islamic society. My personal guess is that if there is gender segregation in education, they can get away with that. But if females are deprived of basic educational rights, that will constitute a problem with neighboring countries as well. Likewise, I think the issue of inclusiveness will depend on how fast and how consistent Taliban is in dealing with the non-Pashtun groups, with Shia. If they are dragging their feet on including Hazaris in the political system, I think for some time probably that will be ignored, but not forever. And of course, countries like Iran will push for this particular issue quite hard. So I think that if you take neighboring countries and countries around Afghanistan, they would definitely emphasize the sovereign rights of Afghanistan to choose its own development model. But again, the question is how they will draw red lines, and I'm sure that these red lines will follow.
And brief addition to this point, I think Andrey excellently exposed this the idea, which I think in the region is dominant, about some red lines. But I think why this is kind of, as human rights, gender is not kind of prioritized in the region right now, because there is, except Tajikistan, the other countries are more or less kind of positively looking on the possibilities of interaction with Taliban. So they're giving kind of a credit for this power, because considering the fact, I think even Taliban didn't expect that they will come to the power in such quick manner. So they're giving some credit them to establish themselves and to provide these human rights and gender issues. And also there is a differences in diplomatic styles in the region and in the Europe or in the West. So if there is a perception that we try to build some positive agenda with each other, so we try to, in an official narratives, to promote these positive things. All the problems are usually discussed behind the doors. I think these ethnic minorities' rights, human rights, and gender issues, I am confident that they are still in the agenda. They are discussed with the Taliban representatives, but not in a bluntly and official manner. But of course, I think it's obvious that regional countries are promoting the provision of this human rights for Uzbek community, Turkmen community, Tajik community, and others. and their inclusion to the further government structures in the country, as well as this human rights and gender issues will be a part of this Taliban recognition in the future.
Thanks for that. And I'll ask another question from Aida Masilhanova. SCO doesn't have a record of intervention in the region broadly. Can we expect more engagement from the SCO in the case of Afghanistan? And what leverage does it have, if so?
Let me start here. I think that one of the problems with the SCO is that it's a loose corporate entity. And of course, on Afghanistan and on some other very important issues, there are deep divisions among member states on how they should proceed. Of course, the most striking division is between India and Pakistan, but also between India and China. Different approaches, different priorities. India has always been much more critical of Taliban than China, not to mention Pakistan. Now we have Iran as a new member to SCO, which makes the whole composition even more complicated. So I think that I share your emotions, Akram. But I think that SCO can still play a role, not so much in the narrowly defined security area, but in promoting multilateral projects. For example, when we're talking about transportation routes, both east-west and north-south, SCO can probably do something in terms of coordinating national approaches to these projects. It might, have a couple of declarations, because initially SCO was launched as a alliance against three evils. If you remember the Chinese notion, it's against terrorism, extremism, and separatism. And I think that it is still the case. But definitions of what constitutes radicalism, terrorism, and separatism might differ from one country to another. So I think that SCO might endorse some of the decisions which will be made probably in smaller minilateral formats, like, for example, Pakistan, China, and Russia, or Uzbekistan, Iran, and China, or something else. So if there is a critical mass of members going for a particular project, I think SCO might be an instrument to legitimize and to endorse such initiatives. But we should not overvalue SCO, because, as I said, it's a loose corporate actor.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, but 15 seconds, because
oh, sure, thank you. Well, because I think the Chinese has had a higher hope for SCO, because SCO has been focused on counterterrorism, and there have been practical operational activities that taken place within the members of SCO. And in terms of the India-Pakistan that dynamic, I think it's worth noting that earlier this month, SCO members did jointly held the Peace Mission 2021 joint counterterrorism exercise, and both India and Pakistan did participate, did send their troops to this exercise. So I think the bottom line is it depends on what we're trying to achieve. So if SCO's goal is to stabilize the country, have a military intervention, I don't think that's going to fly with anybody. But so far, it seems that the lowest common denominator among all the members is counterterrorism, and practical and concrete activities have already taken place in that realm. And we probably can expect more from SCO just falling in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm very sorry to wrap this great discussion up, but our time is really, really up. And let me thank our wonderful speakers. Thank you, Zuhra, Akram, Yoon, and Andrey for your really insightful remarks. And thank you, Bradley, for co-moderating this session. And I want to thank our partners, the Oxo Society and the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And last but not least, I want to thank our Davis Center events team, Chris Martin and Daniel Wallner, who made this event possible. Thank you, and tune in for our event.